nature nut, I'm not afraid to admit. I'm wild about the wild things and I'm proud of it. I'm just a simple case, open and shut. No doubt about it, I'm a nature nut. Today we'll go bird watching, tomorrow we'll catch toads. The next day we'll take photographs of bugs along the road. I never get the feeling that I'm in a rut. That's why I'm a nature nut. Well, I'm a nature nut, I'm not afraid to admit. I'm wild about the wild things and I'm proud of it. I'm just a simple case, open and shut. No doubt about it, I'm a nature nut.
Hi there, nature nuts. Have I ever told you that tiger beetles are my favorite kinds of creatures? They really are. I think it's partly because they live such exciting, peculiar, wacky lifestyles. Like this guy right here. The tiger beetles, they'll hang out in open areas and they just like places where they can see everything that's happening around them. And as soon as some other little bug wanders out into the open, tiger beetles run them down and kill them. It's a pretty simple lifestyle. But this is not a show about tiger beetles. I should admit that right off the bat. I just like to work tiger beetles in whenever I can because I like them so much. This is a show about another sort of creature that uses open spaces as a hunting ground. The open space on the top of the water. I'm talking about pond skaters or water striders. That's what we're going to look for today. There is one sort of water strider that lives on the surface of the open sea, the only truly marine insect. You know, water striders are very near and dear to me, not just because they're common on just about every pond, but you know, I used to be a professional water strider guy. For a couple of years, I worked for Dr. John Spence, one of the world's top expert water strider biologists, and every day, all day, we were studying water striders, either in the lab or else we'd be mucking around in ponds like this. I picked up all sorts of interesting water strider lore. I mean, they're not the only creatures on the surface film of the water. There are also little tiny water treader bugs and some nice big fishing spiders. They're the heaviest creatures that live on the surface, and they're kind of hard on water striders, or pond skaters as they're called in Europe. Easy to recognize because of those long hind legs and middle legs and the short front legs. The young ones have short bodies. The adults have elongate bodies, kind of cigar-shaped or canoe-shaped bodies. And most of them have wings. They can actually fly from pond to pond, although the summer generation, in many species, they don't have wings because they want to put all their energy into reproduction and making eggs. It's very, very interesting. Oh, just bringing back memories being here. It feels great. We used to get a little bit bored sometimes, you know, putzing around in these ponds looking for water striders. We get talking about things like whether or not there are really dinosaurs in the Congo Basin, and the grad students made this Mokele Mbembe monster out of an old rubber boot, and they attached it to a underwater root, and just when I was working through the pond, they yanked on a rope attached to the root, and this great big algae-covered Mokele Mbembe rose up out of the water in front of me. That was a moment. That was the greatest moment I had on my water strider job, being frightened by a Mokele Mbembe. Should have been there. It's a moment of high drama. So how do they do that, eh? That's the central mystery of water striders. How do they stand right up on top of the water? It's a bit of physics. It has to do with surface tension, and perhaps you know what surface tension is. If not, how do I explain it? Well, it's kind of like you go to the cafeteria, there's a thing of pudding, and it's been there for a couple of days, but you can't tell until you get it back to your table, and you got to break through that rind on the top of the pudding before you can get at your pudding. That's what water feels like if you're a little bug, especially if you have water-repellent hairs on the bottom of your feet, which these guys do. Hydrophobic setae, they're called. The surface tension is so strong, so powerful, it can even support massive metal objects like this stainless steel needle. Let me give you a demonstration of that. You'll need a fork, in this case a threek. It's not a toque, that's kind of a hat. And just gently place the needle on the water. And it'll just float. I mean, it's amazing. The water surface holds the needle up, and there you go. Absolutely amazing. Now, the other interesting thing that's happening with water striders and physics, I want you to have a look at the neat shadows that they're casting on the bottom of their little artificial pond here. And they've got these skinny little legs, and yet they're casting big, heavy, balloon-like shadows. How is that? Well, again, it has to do with surface tension. The surface of the water is bent downward by the weight of the bug, and that makes that water surface into a bit of a lens, and the light is refracted differently where the water is bent, and so even though the water is transparent, it still throws a shadow. It's like this magnifying glass. It is transparent, it's clear, and yet it still throws a shadow except for the place where the light is focused. Isn't that amazing? So there you go, a little bit of water strider physics. They are truly amazing creatures living amazing lives. Like other true bugs, water striders feed through a sucking tube-like proboscis. Well, you know, when I was in the water strider business, we used to look after tens of thousands of these things, maybe hundreds of thousands, in plastic tubs. We had rows and rows of them, shelves packed full, different lighting conditions. It was quite a complex business. But the main thing I took away from that experience was the fact that it's really easy to look after water striders in captivity, and they make really interesting aquarium inhabitants. Here's the basic setup. It's simple. You just get an aquarium, any size will do, put some water in it, and then I've got a filter in here, but really all you need is something that will bubble, like an air stone or something. Usually this thing's attached to an air pump and it bubbles away, but you know, the air pump makes a sort of a noise that would be irritating if it was on right now, so I've disconnected it for the purpose of this demonstration. And then you put in your water striders and you give them pieces of cut up styrofoam coffee cup, which they mistake for water plants, floating water plants. I guess you could put in floating water plants, but you know, why make things messier than they have to be? And then the water striders will use those to lay their eggs. Not that one though, they don't like that one. How about this one? There we go. Have a look at this, so neat. They just curve their little abdomen under. There's some fresh eggs. They're set in a jelly coat, and each egg is nicely lined up beside the next one. And as they get older, they darken up. And here are some eggs that are almost ready to hatch. Just before they hatch, you can see little dark eyes in one end of the egg. It's marvelous. And then you should really move them to another tank because the parents will eat the babies when they hatch out. The only other thing you need to think about is what you're going to feed your water striders. Back in the lab, we had this thing called the maggot farm, and this guy called the maggot farmer, and he would raise maggots in rotten liver, and then when the maggots turned into blowflies, he would freeze them, and I would have nice handy jars of frozen blowflies, and I'd just sprinkle a few in each tub every morning, and the water striders would feed on those. Now, I talked to my wife about it. We decided not to set up a maggot farm here at home, so instead I just take moths and things that come to the light trap in the backyard, freeze those, and I'm just going to sprinkle a few in, see if they're hungry here today. Yep, they're hungry. They're always hungry. And remember to take out the old food before you put in the new food so that things don't get too, messy in there. That's all there is to it. Set that up. You too can be a water strider feeder. a water strider insider. What about water strider enemies? I mean, they are little surface predators, but they're not alone. There are also things like whirligig beetles. And I remember talking to water strider people who thought that whirligig beetles could never hurt a water strider. I mean, certainly they can't hurt an adult water strider, but we did some experiments where we put young water striders, little tiny ones, in with various sorts of things that might or might not eat them. And every time we put them in with whirligigs, things got ugly. Things always get ugly when you put water striders with whirligigs. Well, you know, I think this little critter's going to be okay. I think it's just big enough to hold its own against the gigs. Of course, you never quite get big enough to be totally safe in this world, and even adult water striders have to worry about dangers from the deep. Things like fish. Here, let me show you what I mean. This is an African butterfly fish, and if you were an African water strider, this fish would be your worst nightmare. Here in North America, water striders have to worry about other sorts of fish like trout and bass and even small pike, things like that. In fact, you know, when you think about it, with all those enemies on the surface of the water and below the surface of the water, and even some enemies above the surface of the water, things like insect-eating birds, it's amazing there are any water striders at all. But they are terribly prolific, and they're really agile. I mean, they have a great way of just pinging out of the way of danger. Very, very interesting. But of course, as we know, they don't all make it. Although many other water bugs can give a painful bite, water striders are safe to handle. Well, here's a little something I picked up when I was a water strider guy I'd like to share with you. We used to do this thing called the bug count. They're still doing it. It's in its 15th or 16th year, something like that. The idea is every week we would go to this particular pond and we would catch every single water strider on the pond, and we'd count them. And then we'd mark every one. And the way you do it is this. First of all, you catch a water strider, you put it in your net, and you get yourself your little stick with a pin stuck in it, and some enamel paint, some model paint. I've chosen red today. What we used to do was mark the water striders with a different color every week, so that you knew when they arrived on the pond or when they molted to become adults from being little water strider larvae. Now here he is. Now I'm going to grab this water strider very gently by the legs, and if you're gentle you won't hurt them, you won't bend their little legs or anything. And then I'm going to get a little bit of paint on the end of my pin, and I'm going to apply the tiniest dot to the middle of the back of this water strider, and it won't hurt the water strider. And let it dry, and then you can just let it go, and you can recognize that little critter when next you encounter it and feel a greater bond of recognition between you and the water strider. How else are you going to tell them apart? They all look exactly the same.
Used to have the oddest job, a water strider feeder in a research lab. Learned a lot of things about those leggy bugs, while other people looked at us with doubtful shrugs. When I was 5 years old, I said I wanted to be a super expert guy in entomology. My buddy said, "You moron, there's no future in that. Be a fireman like us, At least you get a snazzy hat. It is the oddest thing that the smaller you get, when you fall into the water ain't wet. A little bit bigger and you break right through. Surface tension grabs you like a blanket of glue. In the morning I'd go down into the maggot farm, grab a jar of frozen blowflies, put the radio on. In the incubator room, among the hissing pipes, I'd be listening to Morningside while gathering the data right. What would it be like to have elongated feet, a body like a kayak, and the heart of an athlete? Hydrophobic setting, we just steam along like little tiny sailboats on the surface of the glassy pond. Let me give you a little push. What would it be like to have elongated feet, a body like a kayak, and the heart of an athlete? With hydrophobic setting, we just steam along like little tiny sailboats on the surface of the glassy pond. Oh, what would it be like to have elongated feet, a body like a kayak, and the heart of an athlete? Hydrophobic setting, we just steam along like a little tiny sailboat on the surface of the glassy pond. Oh yeah.
We know with all those predatory water striders and spiders and whirligig beetles, the surface of the water is not a safe place for other small insects. When they get blown there by accident, they're usually going to be lunch or dinner. What about the insects that live right on the shore? I mean, quite often shore-dwelling critters, they get blown out onto the water and they have to get off the water quickly so that they don't wind up being eaten by other creatures. One example is rove beetles. There's quite a few species of rove beetles that live by the water. That's R-O-V-E, not rogue beetles, like rogue elephants. Not to worry, rove beetles, they just rove around. I'm going to show you one called Stenus. It's a long-legged rove beetle. But before I show you that one, I'm going to show you another rove beetle, because I want to make a special point here. Watch what happens when I put this rove beetle on the water. Get out of the vial, you little rove beetle. The rove beetle struggles in the surface tension. This is a bad moment for this rove beetle. It's drowning, so I'm going to save it. There you go, nicely done. Live to rove another day. Let's contrast that with the situation with Stenus. When Stenus falls in the water, it knows exactly what to do. In the water you go, Stenus. Struggles for a minute, then suddenly shoots across the water's surface. How does it do it? Isn't that amazing? Stenus releases a chemical from the tip of its abdomen, you know, the end of the tail, and that chemical lowers the surface tension behind the Stenus so that the stronger surface tension in front of the Stenus will pull the Stenus through the water. Totally amazing. If you're not entirely sure what I'm talking about, let me give you another demonstration here over by the pond. The contents of one water strider egg provides enough food for a tiny parasitic wasp to complete its life cycle. So, ahoy! How do you like my boat? This is the only boat I've ever owned. I'm kind of proud of it. And speaking of boats, I'm going to show you how to build a soap boat. You ever build a soap boat? They work exactly on the same principle as a Stenus. I have some, styrofoam from an old coffee cup here, some scissors. Always carry pointy objects in your belly boat. Well, they are made for fishermen. And I'm just going to trim this thing up into the shape of a boat. This is so cool. This is so cool. Okay, so see, that looks a little bit like a boat, eh? Now, I get my hole punch, and I punch a hole near the back of the boat. Hole punch. And then, things are really, it's always cramped working on a boat. You ever notice that? Then I'm going to cut a little slit from that hole to the back of the boat, and then set her afloat on the old pond here. Now in here I have some dish detergent, and here I have a stick. And I'm going to just put one little drop of dish detergent in that reservoir hole and see what happens. Woo-hoo! Far out. Hope they're gonna obey the rules of the high sea here. I get nervous around other boats. Where is it? Hey, watch yourself! Gee!
Water striders can feel vibrations on the water's surface, and some even communicate in this way.
So, what do you think? Are water striders the coolest bugs or what? I really like them, and I think if I had to be a bug, I wouldn't mind being a water strider. It would be a lot like being a sailor. Just kind of float around on the water's surface, watch for things to happen. Although it'd be difficult for something as big as a person to live the life of a water strider, because there's not much food that falls in the water that we can eat. No cheese sandwiches or anything that I see anyway. Anyway, still a nice idea, kind of a nice little fantasy. So until next time, I'm a nature nut, and I hope you are too. Bye for now. Send out a soap boat if I don't come back.
Same time each and every week, uncensored and uncut. No doubt about it, I'm a nature nut.